We all come from different places. It doesn't make us better or worse than each other. It just makes us different. We all have different reasons for why we show up at church. Some of us grew up in the church and it's all we've ever known. Some of us are out here searching for the meaning of life. Some of us, we're just trying to find someone who will listen. Or we're looking for an inspiration. And yet, some of us, we just show up because we feel obligated. But we all have one thing in common. Each of us, at times, can feel very, very alone. Even here at church. Good people can go to church for months, even years, and never, ever be truly known by anyone. Some of us like to hide in the larger crowd, and I'm not criticizing anyone for that. But some of us, all of us, we need to form better, stronger relationships. And we know it. We all need someone to be our shelter, to never leave us alone, to light the way, to bring us home. See, our joys, our challenges, even our disappointments, all share one common thread. We were never meant to go through them alone.
That is so true. And I'm sure each and every one of us can identify with it. Loneliness is a terrible thing. Gallup has stated that Americans are the loneliest people on planet Earth. Think of that. All that we have and all that we can enjoy, and yet there's something missing in our life. You see, you can be in a crowd and experience loneliness. Loneliness is different than being alone. We have to understand that. It deals with connection. Do you have the ability to experience community with other people, even with your spouse, with your family? You see, this is so important because there's psychological and physical ramifications that are played out in our life and that are attributed to loneliness. Think of this, because it's a wide range of health issues. They say that loneliness is worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That loneliness has a greater impact on lifespan than obesity. That loneliness affects heart disease and dementia, anxiety and depression. Is it any wonder that in America, one of the biggest things that we deal with is anxiety? Why? Because we're lonely people. We feel this loneliness to the core of our being. And for you and I to be able to move from loneliness, we have to leave the borderland that we talked about last week, that comfort zone. And we have to take some risk to be able to shred the cloak of loneliness. And if you weren't here last week, let me just encourage you to download the podcast. Because we talked about taking risk, that we want to go from the status quo to the status go. We want to say goodbye, so long, to the comfort zone. And I shared with you this truth, that we need to take the risk. And I said, for us to take the risk, we got to have a right view of God, that He's our Father, and that He loves us with an incredible, consistent, unconditional love. and that we have to have this identity settled, that now that we've accepted Jesus Christ as the forgiver of our sins and the leader of our life, we're his sons and daughters. And he loves us, he cares about us. And that we develop this sacrificial mentality, that we're willing to give up those things that are comfortable, to be able to live a life of adventure and to move to the holy wild, all for the kingdom advancement. And so I challenged you last week to risk and develop this. And this is why it's so important. Brene Brown, maybe you're familiar with her. She's written a lot of different books, and she's based it all on her research. And here's what she found out. She said that there's a difference between two different groups: those who feel a sense of belonging, a sense of community, a sense of connection, and those who don't. She would say this, she would say, those who have a sense of belonging, those who have a sense of community, a strong sense of love, they believe that they're worthy of things. And what happens, because they believe that they're worthy of things, because they know that they're loved, I would say because they have a right view of God and their identity is settled, what happens is they connect better because they're the first ones to say, I love you. They're the first ones to say, I need help. They're the first ones to be open. They're the first ones to say, I'm sorry. They're the first ones to say, I'm wrong. Because they know that it's not based on shame. They're free, they're open for that. And though they tell somebody that they love them, and though they ask for help, what happens is they don't feel shame if the response is not returned. Because they know who they are. And so what happens is they go into relationships and they give and they're honest and they're open. You ready for this? And they're vulnerable because they're willing to take the risk because they know that they have a heavenly Father who knows the worst about them and yet still loves them. They know that they're sons and daughters of the living God, and so it gives them the freedom to be able to focus on the other person. And so today, I'm going to ask you to take another risk. I'm going to ask you to leave your comfort zone and embrace the uncomfortable. I love this quote that I shared with you last week. The only thing that is stopping you from where you are to where you want to be is your comfort zone. It's your comfort zone. And when you have the right view of God and you know that He's your Father, He's the perfect one, and that you're His son or your daughter, then what happens is that allows you to have a sacrificial mentality, because really that's what relationships are all about. Relationships are all about sacrificing for someone, having the focus on them. And so Jesus invites us to leave the borderland. Jesus invites us to the holy wild. He says this here in Luke, if any one of you wants to be my follower, listen to me, not believe the right stuff and behave the right way. If all you do is believe the right stuff and behave the right way, you will be so judgmental, it will be unbelievably hard to live with you. He calls you and I on a journey. He calls you and I on a journey of uncertainty. He's certain, but everything else is uncertain. He says, if any of you wants to be my followers, you must give up your own way. What's our own way? Comfort, and take up your cross daily and follow me. See, your way and my way is to live in isolation. Your way and my way is to live with a sense of protection. Your way and my way is to be more concerned about our image. And Jesus says, that's not my way. You see, Jesus calls us to live in community, authentic community. And His way is for you and I to be open and honest and genuine because we know that we belong to Him. And that gives us the security, that gives us the strength to be genuine and authentic with one another. I love what Scott Peck has to say. He says, there can be no vulnerability without risk, but there can be no community without vulnerability. See, this is why most of us don't live in community. You know why? We always admire the vulnerability in the other person, but it scares us half to death. So we live life lonely because nobody knows us. And what I would say to us today is this: if you are a Christ follower, you will not experience spiritual transformation apart from living in community, because it's what Jesus calls you and I to live in. He says, if you want to follow me, you got to give up your own way. You see, what happens is our way is, I just want to get to a point in my life of where I'm not dependent upon other people. I want to be financially independent. You know why? So I can do my own thing and go my own way and have my own way. And Jesus said, you know what, Dwight? You got to give up that way if you're going to follow me. If you're really going to experience life and life to the fullest, you're going to have to give way. Here's what he says. He says, if any of you wants to be my follower. And by the way, you know what he does? Listen to me. He invites everybody to follow him. Everybody, anybody can follow him. But he says, just be ready. There's going to be a sense of being uncomfortable, because I'm going to ask you to take up your cross daily. I'm going to ask you to follow me. I'm going to ask you to live in community. That's what he did with the 12 disciples. What did he do? He called 12 men to do life together. To do life together, to do community together, to be uncomfortable with one another. And here's what we would believe at NewPointe. And if you're not a Christ follower and you wonder why there's so much hypocrisy in the church, here's the reason why, okay? Life change is best sustained in authentic community. See, what happens is there's very little transformation in the church because there's very little authentic community in the church. We're more about image than we are integrity. Y'all okay? And so what happens is people pick up on the phoniness. So what is community? All right? It's koinonia. Koinonia means that I am committed to you as I am to Christ. Community means that we have something in common. What do we have in common? It may not be our political background. It may not be our education. It may not be our economic status. You know what we have in common? Jesus. And he invites you and I to live in community with one another, with the focus being Jesus. Not your political differences, not your economic status, not your education, not your race. None of that. And that's what we've made it about today. And so, if you're going to be able to experience life and life to the fullest, listen, you will not do that apart from community. Listen to me. That's why in family life, in Velocity, you know what? We have our children in small groups. That's why we have small groups in Remix with our junior hires and our high school, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to instill in them that it's dangerous to do life alone, that you need other people in your life who have something in common, and that is Jesus. Though everything else about you might be uncommon, but you have this one thing. And so we want to be able to instill this at a very young age, because listen to me, our culture is telling them everything but that. And it's getting there because of technology. Our culture is creating more and more a sense of loneliness. That's why suicide is so high on the list. And we're fighting against that, because we want to lead you to realize and reach your full potential in Jesus Christ. And you cannot do that. You will not do that apart from living in community. And so what is community? It's koinonia. Let me explain it to you the best way. It's this right here. Authentic community occurs when the real you meets real needs for the right reason in the right way. That's what real community is. Now listen to me, okay? Some of us are in small groups, but you're not in community. You know why? Because you never get to this level. And so what happens is, we watch a DVD. What'd you get for answer 4, Betty? Oh, that's interesting. That's good. Hey, how about those Browns? You know what? I think Baker Mayfield is going to really help us this year. And you know what? I don't think the Buckeyes are going to have a hard game until probably week 8. What are we having to eat tonight, by the way? And what happens is, it's not authentic community. It's just a group. And then we get tired of it. And so we quit. Y'all okay? And so listen to me. So we see very little change in our life. Because nobody knows us. Nobody knows the real you. So your real needs don't get met. And so what happens is you're lonely. It's a tough spot to be. And so Paul addresses this to the church at Rome because they were being persecuted. You want me to tell you what? One of the best things that might happen in America is if we would fall into a season of persecution. You know what would happen? Our churches would fill up and our small groups would bust out the seams because it would strip us of everything. And Paul was teaching them how to experience authentic community because they needed one another, just like you and I need one another, though we may not be as aware of it as they were back then. And so Paul writes this to the church in Rome, and he says this. He says, love must be sincere. That means without hypocrisy, okay? Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil and cling to what is good. It means that you must be pure. You must be genuine. And so here's what authenticity looks like in community. It's the real you. It's the real you. It's not a protection of you. You don't go there and say, okay, you know what? I'm not going to let down my guard. You know what? I'm not going to let these people really know who I am. I'm going to protect my image. And so what happens is, if there's no real you, there's no real change. Look what Paul says. He says, love must be sincere, without hypocrisy. Hate what is evil and cling to what is good. Love that is sincere does the hard thing. It says the hard thing in a kind way. You see, listen, when love is sincere, we have to understand two things, and it's this right here. It's caring doesn't always feel like caring. When you really care for somebody, sometimes it doesn't feel like caring. Because we think that caring is doing the nice thing, the comfortable thing. And really caring is doing the right thing. Or maybe love. Love doesn't always feel loving. I mean, if you're a parent, you know this. How many of us have struggled doing the loving thing and disciplining our kids? And what happens is our kids will come back and say, you don't love me. You don't care about me. And caring for them and loving them doesn't feel like caring for them and loving them. Because we have to understand this, professing love is comfortable. Hey, love you, man. Love you. But practicing love takes courage. It takes courage because what happens is the real you has to show up. And your love for that other person has to be sincere enough to tell them the truth. You see, what happens is we think we're kind when we don't tell one another the truth. We're not kind. We're choosing comfort over character. Because love that is sincere is love without hypocrisy. I'm going to tell you the truth. It's going to be hard for me to say, and you know what? It's going to be hard for you to hear. And by the way, sometimes it doesn't turn out right because we don't want to hear the truth. Well, then I'll just take my ball and go home and tell everybody that you were mean and unkind to me. Can I say something? That's why your kids don't want what you have. Because there's very little transformation in your life. Y'all okay? And they see the hypocrisy. Because without somebody speaking to your life and my life, you know what? I'll live in hypocrisy. I need somebody who will love me in a sincere way. I need somebody who will hate evil and cling to that which is good. And so they'll be authentic with me, and they will be genuine with me, and they'll be honest with me so I can grow. See, that's Jesus' way of you and I becoming like him, is to live in community and bring the real you. If there ever should be a place that the environment is one of safety, it should be the church. That the real you can show up. So Paul says, love must be sincere. Hate that which is evil. Cling to that which is good. He goes on to say this. He says, be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourself. You know what he is saying here? The real you, okay, not a protection of you, has to show up so that you can meet real needs, not superficial needs. See, the superficial need is, what we got to eat tonight? The superficial need is to bring me up on what's happening in the world. But the fact of the matter is, you and I have greater needs than that. We have inward needs. We have a war going on inside of us. We have a battle raging inside of us. We have an enemy that wants to destroy us. And so Paul says this. He says love must be sincere, but he says be devoted to that love to one another and honor one another. Do it in what? Humility. Humility. Now, why are we not devoted to one another in love? Because if you're devoted to one another in love, if we're devoted to one another in love, then we're going to tell one another the truth in love, honoring one another above ourselves with humility and with grace. Well, let me tell you why we don't, okay? It's because of comfort. We fear rejection, the fear of rejection. The discomfort of conflict. The apprehension of confrontation. And you know what? Here, listen to me, okay? Listen to me. You know what we do? We hide these behind being caring and being sensitive. Well, I wouldn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I wouldn't want to make anybody mad. And so, you know what? We opt out for comfortability instead of character because we're afraid of rejection. We're afraid of the discomfort of conflict and apprehension, or even this, indifference. We're just indifferent. We're indifferent, and you say, Dwight, what do you mean by being indifferent? Here's what I believe indifference is: a lack of concern where there should be a concern. And so what happens is you see somebody in your life. It could be in your small group. It could be a family member. It could be at work. And you're thinking to yourself, you continue to do that. You continue to act like that. You continue to respond like that. And you know what? She's going to leave you. You're going to get fired. Your son's going to hate you. And what happens is we have a lack of indifference. But I guarantee you, if I were to ask you today, do you wish somebody cared about you enough to warn you about something that now you're paying the price for? I think you're drinking too much. you would say yes. Why didn't they care? Why didn't they care? See, here's how we camouflage it, okay? Here's what we say. Well, I shouldn't interfere. I shouldn't interfere. Here's another one, okay? They haven't asked for my input. How about this one right here? It's none of my business. And so guess what? They end up going down a path because nobody loved them enough. The real you didn't show up to meet real needs because of fear, discomfort, apprehension, and indifference. And see, all of these, let me give you another word for this, is comfort. And so what happens is we bid them off as caring for somebody. No, you don't. You care more. You've honored yourself more than you've honored them. Because what happens is you weren't willing to risk what was needed to be able to meet their real need. And so what happens is we just end up meeting superficial needs. And Paul says you must be devoted to one another in love, honoring one another above yourself. You know what that means? That I honor you so much, I love you so much that I'm willing to risk our relationship because I care that much about you. Because if you continue down that path, if you continue doing what you're doing, you're going to mess up your life. You're going to wreck your life. And yes, we need to do it with humility. Yes, we need to do it with grace, but we need to do it. But we have to be able to become people who are comfortable with being uncomfortable, or we'll never do it. We'll allow fear and discomfort and apprehension and indifference to rule our life. And people around us who you love and I love will suffer. Paul goes on to say this. He says, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. What's he saying? Never be lacking in zeal. Zeal in what? Being the real you. Loving people, honoring people. Never be lax in that. Keep your spiritual fervor in serving the Lord, because how do we serve the Lord? You see, we think we serve the Lord. We pass off by just coming and sitting in rows and listening to a talking head and throwing something in the offering plate and maybe serving a little bit. And we think that gets the job done. It doesn't get the job done. Life transformation does not happen in rows. It happens in circles. It happens with real people, meeting real needs for the right reason. And what's the right reason? Not to please people. See, the real reason is not to please people. See, that's why we live in the comfort zone, is because if we're not careful, our goal is to please people, not to help people. That's why he says here, he says, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. What he says is, don't get lazy on me. Don't get lazy about this, because it's so easy to get lazy. Now, I know that we don't understand what laziness is. If you see me on a fall Saturday, laying on a couch with a bowl of ice cream, watching the Buckeyes, you might say, he's lazy. That's what we think laziness is. But it's much, much, much more than that. Let me tell you what laziness is, okay? Laziness is not doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done. That's laziness. When you know that something needs to be done, when you have this urge that maybe a friend or maybe somebody in a group or maybe in your family, maybe your son or maybe your marriage or maybe a coworker, you feel this urge and you know that something isn't right and somebody should speak up. Dear God, I pray that you bring somebody in Mary's life. You're being lazy. You need to go speak to Mary. You need to have a talk with Mary. But you're being lazy because you're not doing what needs to get done now. And that's why he says, never be lacking in zeal. But keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. How do I serve the Lord? I serve the Lord by serving you. How do you serve the Lord? You serve the Lord by serving me. You see, what happens is we think that we're serving the Lord here today. No, you're just getting the instructions. You're just getting refocused. It's when we go out and we're with other people that we serve the Lord, because we serve the Lord by serving other people. And so Paul goes on and he says, be joyful in hope, patient in affliction. Why? Because when the real you shows up and you start meeting real needs for the right reason, guess what? You're going to experience some affliction, all right? Faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Need of what? Physical needs? Sure. But much more than that, spiritual needs. And practice hospitality. And so what he is saying is this, that we need to be able to do it in the right way. And the right way is not in my strength. The right way is not in your strength. The right way is in God's strength. Because what we're being asked to do in living in authentic community, you cannot do in your own strength. I cannot do in my own strength. That's why very little of us live in authentic community. Because you'll never be able to muster up enough courage. You need to be able, as he says here, you need to be able to rejoice in hope, be patient in affliction, faithful in prayer, sharing with the Lord's people what they need, practicing hospitality. And so we got to do it in the right way. We can't do it in our own strength because we don't have what it takes. Listen, it's a call to courage. It's a call to courage. And so why is authenticity so important? Why is authentic community so important to Jesus? He tells us, John records it. Jesus says, my prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message. That would be us, folks. That all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us. So check this out. So that the world may believe that you have sent me. Wow. You see, what happens is when people see you and me living in authentic community, and really maybe the only thing that we have in common is Jesus. You know what they say? What is going on? This has to be supernatural. There are different races, there's different economic status, there's different education, there's different everything. What's going on here? And what happens is that gives proof that the one who created the world and you and me is living in you and me. Because we've set aside all of our minor differences and we focus on the main thing, and that is becoming like Jesus. And you and I cannot become like Jesus apart from living in authentic community. We got to do the right thing. So what would keep us from that? Let me give you three things real quickly as we wrap up. The first one is individualism. Individualism. I mean, for the last 50 years, this has been a theme in America. Just be your own man, be your own person, be independent of everybody. You know why? Because we don't want to be held accountable. We don't want to be held accountable. We don't want to make the commitment that is necessary to live in community. I'm going to be my own person. And so individualism has undercut living in authentic community. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. Nobody's going to speak into my life. I'm going to protect myself. The second one would be idealism. Idealism. And here's what I mean by that. What happens is this. We get into community and we have this ideal that everything's going to be perfect. Now, aren't we church folks? Aren't we Jesus people? We are, but you know what? We are broken and deeply wounded. Think with me, okay? You ready for this? This just blows my mind. Look who Jesus had in his small group. You would never join it. Matthew, he worked for the government. Rome. Peter, a renegade. Okay? That kind of Rome was oppressing, a Jew. Can you imagine the talks between Matthew and Peter? It'd be a little bit like Trump and Pelosi. How would you like to have those two in your small group? Huh? You know what we would say? No, no, thank you. No, thank you. And so what happens is we have this idealism. And so when we get with other people and somebody disappoints us or somebody says something that we don't agree or we get hurt, what happens is, you know what? We come back and we just say, I'm done, I'm done, I'm done. You know why? Because you don't have a right view of the Father. You don't know that you're His kid. So what happens is you respond to how other people do life or says things to you. Here's the third one, intimidation. And here's what I mean by intimidation. You ready for this? It's not the fear of you knowing the worst about me that bothers me. It's the fear that you'll really know who I am. And so intimidation keeps us from living in authentic community because I'm afraid that you'll really know who I really am. And if you know who I really am, you may just reject me. And so what happens because of our individualism, our idealism, and the intimidation, guess what? We choose to live in comfort, what we think is comfort, but it is deadly. You see, Jesus says it like this. He says, a new command I give you, love one another. You can't love one another unless you're with people. He says, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. He's saying, Dwight, the same way that I've loved you, the same way that I want you to love the people in your life. I want you to be real with them. I was real with you. I want you to meet real needs for the right reason. In the right way. That's what I did with you guys. We lived authentic lives before one another. Yes, we had arguments. Yes, we had disagreements. Yes, we did life together, though. We were committed to one another. And by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another, if you live in community. Listen to me, not if you go to church. Okay, that's the comfortable way. The uncomfortable way is to begin to meet with a group of people and say, you know what, this is so vital to my own spiritual well-being and health that I'm going to prioritize it and I'm going to make it happen. By the way, let me just invite you to serve in family life, to serve in Velocity, to serve in our student ministry, and to be able to model for our young people what it means to live in community. Because I guarantee you, without that, they're going to have a dark, depressed future. Because this is the way in which God has called us to live. So what is authentic community? Authentic community occurs when the real you shows up to meet real needs for the right reason, in the right way. And listen, when you do that, you'll leave borderland and you'll embrace the holy wild that God has for you. Your life will never be the same, and the people around you will never be the same. Let's pray. God, we thank you that you modeled this for us when you came to earth 2,000 years ago. You didn't do life alone. One of the first things that you did when you left home is you found a group of people to do life with. We know them as your disciples. And man, were they different. They had different religious backgrounds. Some were Jews, some were Gentiles, some worked for the government, some were oppressed by the government. But how they came together. And they experienced a love, a different kind of love, that so transformed them that they ended up turning their world upside down. God, may that be true of me. May that be true of us. May that be true of NewPointe. And we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.